First, CO and Tacy to under fire. Dr. Nixera adjusted her six-fingered hands around the peculiar alien anatomy displayed on her medical scanner. In her 50 cycles as a xenomedic, she had treated over 30 different sentient species across the Galactic Coalition, but humans were an entirely new challenge. Their biology was simultaneously robust and fragile in ways that defied conventional medical understanding. Another wave incoming, Doctor, announced her assistant Zeblox, a lanky Venturian whose translucent skin pulsed with anxiety. The transport from Earth Battalion just docked. Preliminary reports suggest 17 casualties, 9 critical. The medical bay of the Coalition hospital ship Elysium was already at 80% capacity. 3 solar cycles into the battle for Proxima Station, and casualties from a dozen Coalition species filled every available treatment pod. The unexpected tenacity of the Swarm Dominion's attack had caught Coalition Command off guard. "Prepare emergency trade protocols," Nixera ordered, her 4 violet eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of stress her species couldn't hide. "And alert Dr. Trexon. We'll need his expertise with mammalian physiology." Nixera still remembered the diplomatic fanfare when humans joined the Galactic Coalition just 8 months ago. A fledgling spacefaring race from a backwater system, humans were welcomed primarily for their numbers and enthusiasm rather than their technological contributions. The Coalition needed soldiers for its war against the Swarm, and Earth had billions of potential recruits. No one expected humans to be deployed so quickly, much less at Proxima Station, one of the most contested territories in Coalition space. Yet here they were. And now their injured were flooding her medical bay. The pneumatic doors hissed open as the first casualties arrived. Coalition medics, a mix of Venturians and Ordaki, rushed forward with hover gurneys, each bearing a human soldier in varying states of distress. The acrid smell of burnt flesh and the coppery tang of human blood filled the air. "By the 7 moons," whispered Zeblox beside her, "they're still conscious." Nixera stared in disbelief. The human at the front of the line had a plasma burn across her torso that had melted through her combat armor, exposing charred tissue and bone. Yet the soldier was not only conscious but attempting to sit up, her face contorted in what must be excruciating pain. "Please remain still," Nixera said, approaching the first hover gurney and activating her universal translator. "You are aboard the Elysium. We will attend to your injuries." "Sergeant Maya Chen," the human rasped, her voice rough with pain yet remarkably steady. 75th Earth Expeditionary Force. "Status of my squad?" "Unknown," Nixera replied, scanning the wound with her diagnostic tool. "This injury requires immediate cellular regeneration. The pain must be—" "Just patch me up, Doc," Chen interrupted, gripping Nixera's forearm with surprising strength. "I need to get back out there." Nixera's tendrils flared in shock. "Back? Sergeant, you have 3rd-degree plasma burns across 40% of your body. Your left lung is partially collapsed, and you've lost approximately 2 liters of blood. You cannot possibly return to combat." The human's lips curved upward in what Nixera recognized as a smile, though it looked more like a grimace. "You'd be surprised what humans can do, Doc." Before Nixera could respond, another human was wheeled past, a male with what appeared to be a completely shattered lower limb. The bone protruded through the flesh at multiple points, yet the soldier was calmly speaking with one of the Ordaki medics, asking about weapon availability aboard the medical ship. "Dr. Nixera," called Dr. Trexon from across the bay, his crystalline form shimmering with stress. "I require your assistance. The human pain management protocols in our database appear to be inadequate." Moving to Trexon's station, Nixera found a human male who had taken shrapnel through his abdomen. The Coalition's standard pain suppressants, powerful enough to sedate a Krillian war beast, seemed to be having minimal effect. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Earth Special Forces, the human introduced himself through gritted teeth. "The meds help a bit, but I can still feel everything. Got anything stronger?" Stronger would kill you, Trixon stated flatly, his crystalline structure tinkling in agitation. Your species has an unusual resistance to our standard analgesics, but your central nervous system would cease functioning if we increased the dosage. Then just close me up without them, Rodriguez suggested. Wouldn't be my first field surgery without anesthesia. Nixera and Trixon exchanged horrified glances. That would be barbaric, Nixera protested. Rodriguez actually laughed, then winced as the movement disturbed his wounds. Doc, humans come from a barbaric place. We evolved on a death world, remember. Pain is just another survival mechanism. Over the next 3 hours, the medical team worked frantically to stabilize the human casualties. Nixera had never encountered patients with such a high tolerance for pain or such reckless disregard for their own physical limitations. What disturbed her most was their collective insistence on returning to battle as quickly as possible. They're displaying symptoms consistent with severe psychological trauma, she quietly told Trexon as they took a brief respite. Perhaps a species-wide dissociative disorder. No rational being would willingly return to combat with injuries of this magnitude. I don't think it's pathological, Trexon replied, his crystal facets refracting the overhead lights as he considered. Based on what I studied of Earth's evolutionary history, humans developed in an environment of constant threat. They're conditioned to function through pain and trauma in ways most coalition species never needed to evolve. Sergeant Chen had been moved to Recovery Pod 7 after emergency treatment. Despite Nixera's explicit instructions for complete bed rest, she found the human standing beside her pod, examining her partially regenerated wounds with clinical interest. Sergeant Chen, you must return to the pod immediately, Nixera insisted. The bioregenerative field is only effective when you're fully immersed. How long until I'm cleared for duty? Chen asked, ignoring the order. Cleared for, at minimum, 3 standard cycles. Optimally, you should undergo 2 weeks of cellular therapy followed by physical rehabilitation. Chen shook her head. 3 days is too long. My unit is still out there. Your unit will have to manage without you, Nixera said firmly. Your body has sustained damage that would kill most species. The fact that you're standing is already a medical anomaly. It's not anomalous for humans, Chen replied with that same pain-grimace smile. We break, we heal, we keep going. It's what we do. Before Nixera could argue further, the ship's emergency klaxons blared. The overhead lights shifted to combat red, and the ship's AI announced in multiple languages. ALERT. Swarm boarding parties DTECTED. All Medicael Personael Implementment PROTOCOLSIGMA9. This is not a drill. Nixera felt her heart stutter in her chest. Sigma 9 was the evacuation protocol for critical patients. The Elysium was under attack. What's happening? Chen demanded, immediately alert despite her injuries. We're being boarded, Nixera explained, already moving to activate the emergency force fields around the most vulnerable patients. The swarm must have bypassed our defensive perimeter. Where are the ship's Marines? The Elysium is a medical vessel. We have minimal security personnel, just enough to maintain order among patients. Chen's face hardened into something Nixera hadn't seen before, a cold, focused expression that sent an involuntary shiver down her tendrils. Get me a weapon, the human said quietly. Absolutely not. You're a patient, not a combatant. Chen's eyes narrowed. Doc, in about 2 minutes, we're all going to be either combatants or corpses. The swarm doesn't recognize medical neutrality. They'll slaughter everyone aboard. Patients, doctors, everyone. A distant explosion rocked the ship, and the lights flickered momentarily. From the corridor outside came the distinctive high-pitched whine of swarm particle weapons. Dr. Nixera. Zeblox's panicked voice came over the comm. Security checkpoints 3 and 4 have been breached. Swarm drones are moving through Deck C toward the main medical bay. Deck C, just 2 levels above their current position. Nixera felt a cold dread spreading through her body. The Elysium carried over 300 patients from a dozen species, many immobile and vulnerable. If the swarm reached them, a commotion near the recovery pods drew her attention. To her astonishment, all 8 of the human patients were up and moving, disconnecting themselves from medical equipment with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant Rodriguez, his abdomen still partially open and sealed with temporary medical foam, was helping another soldier to stand. "What are you doing?" Nix Ara demanded. "You'll kill yourselves." "Better on our feet than in our beds," Rodriguez answered grimly. He turned to Chen, who seemed to have naturally assumed command of the group. "Sergeant, what's the play?" Chen was already examining a schematic of the ship on a nearby medical terminal. "Armory should be here. Deck B, Section 12. Security hub adjacent. We secure weapons, establish a defensive perimeter at these choke points." She pointed to several locations on the display. "Priority is protecting the medical bay and critical patients who can't be moved." Rodriguez nodded. "Barnes, Patel, you two still mobile enough for point?" 2 of the less severely injured humans nodded, their faces set with determination despite their bandages and visible wounds. "This is insanity," Nixera protested. "You are injured non-combatants under my care." "With respect, Doctor," Chen said, her voice calm and eerily detached. "Every human in Coalition service is a combatant first, patient second. Now, are there any weapons in this medical bay? Anything we can use?" Trixon approached, his crystalline form vibrating with anxiety. "There are surgical cutting tools that could be repurposed, and the medical refrigeration units contain several highly combustible compounds." Chen smiled, and this time there was nothing pained about it, only a predatory satisfaction that made Nixera's tendrils curl. "Good. That's a start." Within minutes, the humans had organized themselves into what they called a fire team, arming themselves with improvised weapons fashioned from medical equipment. They moved with purpose and coordination that belied their injuries, communicating in terse phrases and hand signals. Another explosion, much closer this time, shook the deck beneath them. The sounds of combat, energy weapons, screams, the chittering speech of swarm drones, echoed from the level above. "They're through Deck C," Chen announced. "Rodriguez, you and I take point. Barnes, Patel, guard R6. The rest of you, fortify this position. No swarm gets through to the critical care ward." "Sergeant," Nixera made one final attempt. "Your wounds will reopen under physical strain. You could bleed out in minutes." Chen checked the makeshift weapon in her hands, a surgical laser cutter modified to emit a continuous beam. "Then I guess we better be quick," she said with that same unsettling smile. "Doctor, get your staff and any mobile patients to the emergency shelters. We'll buy you time." Before Nixera could object further, the humans moved out, their movements synchronized despite their various injuries. They disappeared through the medical bay doors just as the ship's AI announced. "Warning. Hostile forces AP Puro-HHing Deck B. All NLNQOM8 Hiorasonenil EVHUUAKI IMEDOA. Trixon moved beside her, his crystalline form reflecting the red emergency lights. "Should we follow evacuation protocols?" Nixera stared at the doors where the humans had vanished, conflicted between her duty as a doctor and her growing realization of what these humans were willing to sacrifice. "Begin moving critical patients to the protected inner ward," she decided. "But I'm going after them. Those humans are still my patients, regardless of their unusual approach to recovery." Grabbing a medical kit, Nixera hurried after the human soldiers, her medical training at war with her growing understanding that she was witnessing something beyond her experience. A species that refused to acknowledge the limitations of flesh and bone when their companions were in danger. The sounds of combat grew louder as she approached the junction leading to Deck B. Rounding a corner, she stopped dead in her tracks at the scene before her. The corridor was littered with the chitinous remains of at least a dozen swarm drones, And standing amid the carnage, covered in the iridescent blue blood of their enemies, were the human patients, her patients, still fighting, still standing despite wounds that should have incapacitated any rational being. Sergeant Chen, her recently regenerated tissue already torn open and seeping blood, was engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a swarm warrior twice her size. As Nixera watched in horror and fascination, Chen drove a broken piece of medical equipment through the creature's central nerve cluster with practiced precision. Beyond them, Rodriguez and the others had established a defensive position around the deck access point, preventing more swarm from advancing toward the medical bay. Despite their grievous injuries, they fought with a coordinated ferocity that left Nixera speechless. This was not the behavior of civilized beings from an advanced society. This was something primal, something forged in the crucible of a world that Nixera was beginning to understand had shaped its dominant species into something the Coalition had never encountered before. As Chen dispatched the swarm warrior and turned, noticing Nixera's presence, the human's expression shifted from battle focus to something almost apologetic. "Sorry about the mess, Doc," Chen said, wiping blue blood from her face. "We'll try not to undo all your good work." And in that moment, watching these injured humans standing their ground against an enemy that terrified most of the Coalition, Dr. Nixera began to understand what the Galactic Council had unwittingly acquired when they invited Earth to join their alliance. Not just soldiers, something else entirely. Strength beyond understanding. The corridor trembled as another explosion rocked the Elysium. Dr. Nixera braced herself against the bulkhead, her medical scanner still clutched tightly in one hand. The ship's AI announced damage reports in its eerily calm voice, while emergency repair protocols activated around them. "Doctor, get back to the medical bay," Sergeant Chen ordered, wincing as she applied pressure to her reopened wound. "We've got this section secured for now, but you shouldn't be here." Nixera gestured with her medical scanner. "You're hemorrhaging, Sergeant. At least let me seal that wound properly." Chen glanced down at the blood seeping between her fingers with mild annoyance, as though it were nothing more consequential than a spilled beverage. "Fine. Patch me up. But make it quick. They'll be coming back with reinforcements." Rodriguez approached from his position at the corridor junction, dragging his injured leg. "Comm systems are down on this deck, but I managed to boost a signal through to the Coalition fleet. The Dauntless is nearby. Captain Shen says they're launching boarding parties to counter the swarm. ETA 7 minutes. "Good. 7 minutes we can handle." Chen nodded, grimacing slightly as Nixera applied a fresh layer of regenerative foam to her wound. "How's everyone else holding up?" "Barnes took a nasty hit. He's using a wall to stay upright. Patel and Jackson are still operational. The rest are in defensive positions around the medical bay entrances." Nixera marveled at their clinical discussion of their own conditions, as if they were describing the status of equipment rather than their bodies. In her 50 cycles as a xenomedic, she had never encountered a species that could so completely compartmentalize physical pain. "Your species continues to confound me," she admitted as she finished sealing Chen's wound. "Most beings with injuries of this severity would be incapacitated by shock alone, yet you operate as if merely inconvenienced." Chen's lips quirked into that now familiar pain smile. "Humans are stubborn, Doc. Evolution wasn't kind to us. We didn't get natural armor or superior strength or any of the fancy adaptations other species have. We just got really, really hard to kill." A series of rapid explosions from several decks above interrupted their conversation. The distinct resonance pattern of Coalition breach charges was unmistakable. "That's our people," Rodriguez said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Right on schedule." The ship's emergency lighting flickered, then stabilized. From the comm unit on Rodriguez's borrowed security vest came a burst of static followed by a human voice. "This is Captain Shen, 103rd Earth Special Forces. We've established a beachhead on Deck A and are moving to secure the ship. All Coalition personnel report status." Rodriguez activated the comm. Lieutenant Rodriguez and Surgeon Chen, with wounded personnel from Earth Battalion. We've secured access points to the medical bay on Deck B. Be advised, we have multiple swarm units neutralized but expect counterattack. Copy that, Lieutenant. Hold position. Reinforcements incoming. Chen checked her makeshift weapon, then glanced at Nixera. Last chance to get back to your patients, Doc. Before Nixera could respond, her medical scanner chimed an alert. One of her critical patients was experiencing severe fluctuations in life signs. She hesitated, torn between her duty to the injured soldiers before her and those waiting in the medical bay. Go, Chen said softly, understanding in her eyes. We've got this covered. With a reluctant nod, Nixera hurried back toward the medical bay, her mind racing with questions about these unusual allies the Coalition had found. As she navigated the corridors, she passed more humans, these fresh and uninjured, moving in combat formation toward the positions Chen and Rodriguez were defending. They carried standard Coalition weapons and moved with practiced efficiency, but it was their expressions that caught her attention, the same focused intensity she had seen in her patient's eyes. Back in the medical bay, chaos had given way to organized emergency procedures. Dr. Trexon was stabilizing a Neuraxi patient whose life support had been damaged in the attack, while Zeblox coordinated the medical staff's efforts. Dr. Nixera, Zeblox exclaimed upon seeing her. We feared the worst when you didn't return. The human patients are currently defending this ship, Nixera finished, moving to assist with the critical patient, against all medical advice and reason. Trixon's crystalline form shimmered with something like admiration. Remarkable species. I've reviewed the security feeds. They've repelled 3 swarm assaults with improvised weapons and catastrophic injuries. They're going to kill themselves, Nixera muttered, though with less conviction than before. Perhaps, Trexon acknowledged, but they may save everyone else in the process. As if to punctuate his statement, the deck beneath them shuddered from another explosion. This one different in resonance, more like the Elysium's engines training against external forces. The ship's AI announced, Warning. Swarm Siriwizar, attempting force docking at airlock 12B in emergency protocols, INITIATD. Airlock 12B. Directly adjacent to the medical bay's emergency evacuation point. They're trying to bypass our defenders, Zeblox realized, his translucent skin paling further. If they breach that airlock, seal the inner doors, Nixera ordered. Initiate quarantine protocols on the critical care wards. As her staff rushed to secure the most vulnerable patients, Nixera's mind flashed back to her first encounter with humans, 6 months before the current conflict. A training exercise with the newly integrated Earth forces, an exercise that, in retrospect, should have prepared her for what she was witnessing today. The Coalition training facility on Proxima Station had been buzzing with activity as the first human military units arrived for joint exercises. Nixera, there as part of the medical observation team, had been assigned to monitor the humans' physiological responses to various combat scenarios. They're so fragile-looking, Zeblox had remarked as they watched the human soldiers prepare for the endurance course. Compared to the armored Krell or the regenerative Ordaki troops, the humans appeared almost delicate. Their physical parameters are unimpressive, Nixera agreed, studying her preliminary scans. Below average strength compared to Krell, inferior sensory capacity compared to Venturians, slower reflexes than Ordaki. I'm not sure what they bring to Coalition forces. The course began, a punishing 20-kilometer route through Proxima's dense jungle terrain, designed to test the limits of Coalition soldiers. The alien troops moved with practiced efficiency, each species using their natural advantages to navigate the obstacles. 3 hours in, reports came of the first casualties, a Venturian team caught in a simulated minefield, an Ordaki squad bogged down in swampland. Standard attrition for such exercises. Then, unexpectedly, A human squad emerged at the first checkpoint, dirty, bleeding from multiple minor injuries, but moving at a steady pace that hadn't slowed since the start. "That's not possible," Zeblok said, checking the tracking data. "They haven't stopped once. Not for rest, not for water." By the halfway point, all but 2 non-human teams had withdrawn for medical attention or exhaustion. The humans continued, despite injuries that Nixera's scans indicated should have been debilitating. At the final checkpoint, a human surgeon named Reeves collapsed, her leg broken from a fall on the mountain section. The coalition medics moved to evacuate her, but to their shock, her teammates simply created a rough splint from available materials, gave her a stimulant injection, and continued, with Reeves insisting she could finish. "This is barbaric," Nixera had protested to the human commander overseeing the exercise. "That soldier needs immediate medical attention. She'd be more upset if you pulled her out," the commander had replied with a shrug. "Humans don't like to quit, Doc. It's not in our nature." All 8 human teams completed the course, the only species with a 100% completion rate. When Nixera examined them afterward, she found evidence of stress fractures, torn ligaments, severe dehydration, and various contusions. Injuries that would have sent any other coalition species to the infirmary were dismissed by the humans as nothing serious. It was the first time Nixera had glimpsed what she was seeing now in full display, a species with an almost pathological determination to continue functioning despite their bodies' attempts to shut down. A commotion at the medical bay entrance snapped Nixera back to the present crisis. Captain Shen of the Earth Special Forces burst in, accompanied by a squad of human soldiers in full combat gear, and, to Nixera's astonishment, Sergeant Chen and Lieutenant Rodriguez, both visibly worse for wear, but still moving under their own power. "Doctor," Captain Shen addressed her crisply, "swarm forces are attempting to breach airlock 12B. We need to evacuate critical patients immediately." Nixera gestured to the complex life support systems surrounding many of the patients. "Impossible. Many cannot be moved without specialized transport units, which we don't have enough of." Shen's expression hardened. "Then we hold here. Lieutenant Rodriguez reports you have surgical equipment that can be repurposed as weapons." Before Nixera could answer, the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered, and emergency klaxons blared a new warning. "Hulol Duriage, DTTKT. Deck B, Section 14. Emergency containment active." Section 14. The corridor outside airlock 12B. The swarm had broken through. "They'll be here in minutes," Shen said grimly. "Doctor, get your staff and any mobile patients into the secure inner chambers. My team will establish a defense perimeter." Chen stepped forward, her face pale from blood loss, but her eyes clear. "Captain, request permission to assist." Shen looked at her incredulously. "Sergeant, with all due respect, you're barely standing." "I can still shoot," Chen insisted, "and I know the layout of this deck better than your team." Rodriguez moved to stand beside her. "Same here, sir. We've already fought these bastards once today. Might as well finish the job." The corner of Shen's mouth twitched in what might have been reluctant pride. "Fine. But I want both of you behind cover, not on the front line." "Understood." Chen and Rodriguez nodded, accepting weapons from Shen's team. Nixera watched this exchange with growing alarm. "Captain, these soldiers are my patients. They have severe injuries that require immediate attention. I cannot authorize." "Doc," Chen interrupted gently, "with respect, you don't have the authority to authorize or deny anything right now. This is combat. Different rules apply." "She's right," Shen confirmed. "In Coalition Emergency Protocols, Section 47B, during active shipboard combat, military command supersedes medical authority except in matters directly affecting mission-critical medical procedures." Nixera's tendrils flattened against her skull, a sign of deep frustration in her species. "This is madness. You're asking injured beings to fight a battle they're in no condition to face. No, Shen corrected, checking his weapon with practiced ease. I'm not asking them to do anything. They're volunteering. That's what humans do. Before Nixera could argue further, the distant sound of swarm weaponry grew louder. The battle was approaching the medical bay. Last chance, Doc, Shen said. Get your people to safety. We'll handle this. Trexon approached, his crystalline form resonating with decision. I will remain to assist with casualties. The rest of the medical staff should evacuate with the critical patients. Zeblox nodded. I too will stay. Nixera looked between her colleagues and the human soldiers preparing for battle, some fresh and uninjured, others who should by all rights be unconscious in medical pods. In that moment, something shifted in her understanding. I'm staying as well, she decided. If you insist on fighting with these injuries, then you'll need immediate medical support. Shen nodded once, accepting her decision. Get behind cover and stay there unless someone needs emergency treatment. Rodriguez, Chen, show the doctors where to position themselves. As the humans established defensive positions around the medical bay entrances, Nixera prepared emergency medical supplies. The injured human patients who weren't mobile enough to fight had insisted on being armed, creating a final defensive line around the most vulnerable alien patients. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. The lights failed completely for several seconds before emergency power restored minimal illumination. From beyond the medical bay doors came the distinctive chittering of swarm warriors. Here they come, Shen announced calmly. Remember your training. Short, controlled bursts. Aim for central nerve clusters or sensory organs. What followed was unlike anything Nixera had witnessed in her long medical career. The swarm forces, insectoid warriors bred for combat, breached the outer defenses and swarmed into the corridor outside the medical bay. The humans met them with coordinated fire, each soldier covering specific zones with mechanical precision. When the first wave broke through the doorway, the battle descended into chaos. Shen's fresh troops engaged the swarm directly, while Chen and Rodriguez provided covering fire from protected positions. Despite their injuries, their accuracy was remarkable. A swarm warrior broke through the defensive line, charging toward the critical care pods where immobile patients lay helpless. Before it could reach them, Chen intercepted the creature, emptying her weapon into its armored carapace. When the weapon clicked empty, she discarded it without hesitation and engaged the wounded but still dangerous warrior in hand-to-hand combat. Nixera watched in horror as Chen's recently sealed wounds reopened under the strain. The human was literally bleeding out while fighting, yet showed no sign of stopping or even slowing down. Get down, a voice shouted, and Nixera found herself pulled to the deck by Rodriguez, just as a swarm energy weapon discharged over their position. The blast caught one of Shen's soldiers in the shoulder, spinning him around but remarkably not taking him out of the fight. Stay here, Rodriguez ordered her, then limped forward to rejoin the battle, his injured leg dragging slightly but his aim steady. The ship's comm system crackled to life. All personnel, this is Captain Torvin of Coalition Dreadnought Imperator. We have engaged the swarm vessels attacking the Elysium. Hold your positions. Reinforcements are inbound. The announcement seemed to energize the human defenders. They pressed forward with renewed vigor, pushing the swarm back from the medical bay entrance. Chen, blood-soaked but still moving, rejoined Rodriguez in providing covering fire for Shen's advance. When the second wave of swarm forces hit, it was even more chaotic than the first. The creatures seemed to understand the tactical importance of the medical bay and focused their assault accordingly. 3 of Shen's soldiers went down in the initial rush, their wounds severe enough that even human determination couldn't keep them fighting. Nixera rushed forward to drag the injured soldiers to safety, Trexon and Zeblox at her side. As she worked frantically to stabilize a human with a chest wound that would have killed any other species instantly, she found herself in the middle of the combat zone, energy weapons and projectiles flying overhead. A shadow fell across her. Looking up, she saw a massive swarm warrior looming over her, its mandibles clicking in anticipation. Nexera froze, certain her final moment had come. The creature lurched suddenly, blue ichor spraying from multiple impact points in its carapace. It toppled forward, revealing Sergeant Chen standing behind it, a captured swarm weapon in her hands. The human's face was ghostly pale from blood loss, her bandages completely soaked through, yet her hands remained steady on the weapon. "You okay, Doc?" Chen asked, as casually as if they were meeting in a corridor. Before Nexera could respond, the ship's internal gravity fluctuated wildly, a sign that the Elysium's engines were taking damage. Everyone, human and alien alike, momentarily struggled to remain upright. In that moment of disorientation, another swarm warrior broke through, heading directly for a cluster of critical care pods containing completely helpless patients. Chen saw it too, but was too far away to intercept. Without conscious thought, Nexera found herself moving. Using her species' natural agility, she launched herself into the creature's path, wielding a surgical laser as an improvised weapon. The swarm warrior swatted her aside like an insect, sending her crashing into a bank of medical equipment. Pain exploded across Nexera's body as she collapsed to the floor. Through blurred vision, she saw the swarm warrior looming over the defenseless patients, mandibles clicking in anticipation of easy prey. Then a blur of motion intercepted the creature. Lieutenant Rodriguez, dragging his shattered leg, had thrown himself bodily at the swarm warrior. The human locked his arms around the insectoid's central nerve cluster, the closest thing to a vulnerable point on their armored bodies, and drove a medical scalpel repeatedly into the gap between carapace segments. The swarm warrior thrashed wildly, its barred limbs tearing into Rodriguez's already damaged body. Yet the human maintained his grip, driving the scalpel deeper with each strike until the creature's movements became erratic, then ceased altogether. Rodriguez rolled off the dead swarm, his breathing labored and skin ashen. Nexera forced herself to her feet and staggered toward him, medical scanner already assessing the devastating new injuries layered over his previous wounds. "Why?" she managed to ask as she applied emergency hemostatic foam to multiple puncture wounds. "You were already critically injured. This was suicide." Rodriguez's eyes, clouded with pain but still somehow alert, fixed on hers. "Because that's the job," he whispered. "Protect those who can't protect themselves." Another explosion rocked the ship, this one different in character, the distinctive resonance of coalition phase cannons firing at close range. Through the viewport, Nexera caught glimpses of massive coalition warships engaging the swarm vessels. "This is Coalition Command," a new voice announced over the ship's comm system. "We have visual confirmation of Elysium. Initiating emergency extraction. All personnel prepare for potential sudden decompression as we disengage swarm boarding vessels." Captain Shen appeared beside them, his combat armor scorched and dented. "Status?" he demanded, glancing at Rodriguez's condition. "Critical but stabilizing," Nexera replied automatically. "He needs immediate." "Later," Shen cut her off. "The swarm are retreating. I need every mobile defender at the airlock junction. They're going to try one final push before their ships disengage." Rodriguez attempted to rise, but Nexera firmly pushed him back down. "He is not going anywhere," she said with an authority that surprised even herself. "Find another soldier." To her astonishment, Shen nodded. "Keep him alive, Doctor." He turned to leave, then paused. "And thank you for standing with us." As Shen gathered his remaining troops for the final defense, Nexera continued treating Rodriguez. Across the medical bay, Chen had finally succumbed to her injuries and blood loss, collapsing beside the swarm warrior she'd killed. Trixon was attending to her, his crystalline form humming with focused energy as he worked to stabilize her condition. The sounds of battle grew distant, then faded entirely. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Nexera and her team worked frantically to stabilize the most critically injured patients, both the original casualties and those newly wounded in the defense of the medical bay. Finally, the ship's lighting returned to standard illumination, and the all-clear signal sounded throughout the vessel. "This is Captain Torvin of the Imperator," the comm system announced. "The swarm vessels have been neutralized. Medical teams are en route to the Elysium. Well done, everyone." In the sudden silence following constant battle, Nyxera found herself standing amid the aftermath. Medical equipment scattered and damaged, the deck stained with blood of multiple colors, and the bodies of swarm warriors piled at the entrances where the human defenders had made their stand. Zebulok's approach, his translucent skin still pulsing with anxiety, but now tinged with something else, a sort of reverent awe. "I've never seen anything like it," he whispered. "The humans, they shouldn't have been able to stand, much less fight." "No," Nyxera agreed, watching as coalition medical teams began pouring into the bay to assist. "By every medical principle I understand, what they did was impossible." Trixon joined them, his crystalline structure reflecting the restored lighting in prismatic patterns. "Perhaps that's why the swarm fear them so much." "The swarm?" Nyxera looked at him in surprise. "The swarm fear nothing. Didn't you notice?" Trixon gestured to the fallen swarm warriors. In the final stages of the battle, they were specifically targeting the injured humans, not the fresh troops, not the medical equipment, not even the critical patients. They were prioritizing eliminating Chen, Rodriguez, and the others who shouldn't have been able to fight. Nyxera considered this observation. Recognition of tactical threat, or recognition of something they don't understand, Trixon suggested. Something that defies their high understanding of how biological organisms should function. Over the next 2 days, as the Elysium underwent emergency repairs while being escorted back to Coalition space by a military detachment, Nyxera immersed herself in treating the injured humans. Their physiology continued to surprise her. They healed faster than her medical models predicted, required less pain management than any comparable species, and consistently attempted to leave their treatment pods before being medically cleared. On the 3rd day, she received a summons to the ship's command center, temporarily occupied by Coalition military leadership. Admiral Vexhar, Supreme Commander of Coalition forces in the Proxima sector, was conducting a debriefing. When Nyxera entered, she was surprised to find Sergeant Chen already there, seated at the conference table, despite having undergone major reconstructive surgery less than 48 hours earlier. The human looked pale but alert, and acknowledged Nyxera with a respectful nod. "Dr. Nyxera," Admiral Vexhar greeted her, the distinguished Ordeki's ceremonial armor gleaming under the command center's lights. "Please join us. We were just discussing the defense of the medical bay." Taking a seat, Nyxera noticed several other high-ranking officers around the table, Krell, Venturian, and 2 humans she didn't recognize. One wore the insignia of Earth's Joint Military Command. "As I was saying," Chen continued what appeared to be an interrupted report, "Lieutenant Rodriguez organized the initial defense with the wounded personnel, establishing choke points at these access corridors." She indicated points on a holographic display of the ship. "When Captain Shen's team arrived, we integrated into their defensive structure. Using patients as combatants," Vexhar observed neutrally, "a tactical choice not found in Coalition military doctrine." "With respect, Admiral," Chen replied, "Earth military doctrine considers all personnel combat capable until proven otherwise. Our medical protocols are designed to return soldiers to functionality as quickly as possible." The human general, his nameplate identified him as General Oko, leaned forward. "What Sergeant Chen is too modest to explain is that this approach evolved from Earth's long history of asymmetric warfare. When you're consistently outgunned, outmanned, or facing superior technology, you learn to maximize every available resource, including wounded personnel." Admiral Vexhar's compound eyes shifted to Nyxera. "Doctor, as the chief medical officer who treated these human soldiers, I would value your assessment of their actions from a medical perspective." Nyxera collected her thoughts carefully before responding. From a traditional medical standpoint, what these humans did was reckless and potentially life-threatening. They deliberately exacerbated existing injuries, ignored medical advice, and placed tremendous strain on already compromised physiological systems. She paused, aware of Chen watching her intently. However, she continued, I must acknowledge that without their intervention, the swarm would have overrun the medical bay. They saved hundreds of lives at risk to their own. And most surprisingly, they survived, defying medical models and expectations. Fascinating, one of the Krell officers rumbled, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. In the field, we have observed human soldiers continuing to function despite injuries that would incapacitate our warriors. We assumed they were using chemical stimulants or pain blockers. Chen smiled slightly. Sometimes we do, but mostly it's just how we're built, mentally more than physically. Humans evolved on a world where giving up meant death. That wiring runs deep. Admiral Vexhar studied the human with newfound interest. This resilience, can it be taught to other species? I don't think so, Chen replied honestly. It's not really a technique or skill. It's more like, she searched for words, a refusal to accept limitations when others are depending on you. The meeting continued, discussing tactical implications and strategic adjustments based on the swarm's new tactics. Throughout it all, Nixera found herself watching Chen, noting how the human maintained perfect military bearing despite wincing occasionally when she moved too suddenly, observing how she participated clearly and cogently in complex tactical discussions while running a fever that Nixera's discreet medical scan revealed was over 39 degrees Celsius. When the meeting concluded, Nixera approached Chen as the others filed out. You should be in the medical bay, she said, but without her previous frustration. Your fever is climbing, and those regenerated tissues need proper monitoring. Chen grimaced. I know. I feel like garbage, honestly. But the Admiral needed first-hand information, and Rodriguez is still unconscious. He saved my life, Nixera said quietly. When the swarm warrior attacked me, he shouldn't have been able to move, let alone fight. Yeah, that sounds like Rodriguez. Chen smiled fondly. He's got 3 kids back on Earth. Shows their pictures to everyone. I think being a father makes him extra protective. This simple detail, this glimpse of humanity beyond the battlefield, struck Nixera profoundly. These weren't just remarkable biological specimens or unusual warriors. They were people with families and lives they desperately wanted to return to, yet were willing to sacrifice for others. Come on, she said, offering support as Chen stood shakily. Let's get you back to medical before you collapse and ruin your species' fearsome reputation. Chen laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. Wouldn't want to do that. The swarm might stop being scared of us. As they walked slowly back toward the medical bay, Nixera considered everything she had witnessed over the past few days. In her long career as a xenomedic, she had treated countless species, each with their own unique biological advantages. The Krell with their natural armor, the Ordaki with their regenerative capabilities, the Venturians with their adaptive physiology. Humans had none of these advantages. Their bodies were, by most objective measures, unremarkable. Yet they possessed something she was only beginning to understand, a quality that transcended physical limitations and defied medical explanation. In the medical bay, Nixera helped Chen back to her treatment pod, noting with professional satisfaction that Lieutenant Rodriguez's vital signs had stabilized. He would recover against all medical probability. You know, Chen said as she settled into the pod, humans have a saying, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. An acknowledgement of physical limitations, Nixera asked, adjusting the pod settings. Chen smiled tiredly, more like a challenge to be overcome. When push comes to shove, humans have a way of making the flesh obey the spirit. As Chen finally surrendered to much-needed rest, Nixera updated the patient's medical file. Under species characteristics of note, she added a new entry. Humans demonstrate an exceptional ability to continue functioning despite catastrophic injury or physical distress. This appears to be not merely a physiological adaptation, but a psychological one, a form of determination that can temporarily override biological imperatives when others are at risk. While medically inadvisable, this trait may prove to be humanity's most significant contribution to the coalition. She paused, then added one final line. Recommend all coalition medical personnel receive specialized training in human psychology and emergency care, with emphasis on the understanding that standard medical protocols regarding patient capabilities may not apply to this species. What humans believe they can do appears to be a more reliable indicator of their capabilities than any physiological measurement we can currently provide. Standing in the center of her medical bay, now full of recovering patients of a dozen species, including the remarkably resilient humans who had defended it, Dr. Nixera felt a profound shift in her understanding of what it meant to be strong. Perhaps true strength wasn't about natural armor or regenerative abilities, or superior physical traits. Perhaps it was about continuing when continuation seemed impossible, about refusing to yield when yielding was the only logical choice, about protecting others, even when your own body was breaking. If that was true, then these fragile-looking humans might just be the strongest species the coalition had ever encountered. And the swarm, for all their biological perfection and hive mind calculation, had legitimate reason to fear them. Because how do you defeat an enemy that doesn't understand when it's beaten?